Welcome to VCR, a vintage cinema rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
And I'm simultaneously more and less afraid of the water.
That's a great way to put it, actually.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. This week we're doing Piranha.
Yeah, and you know what? I thought this was a really interesting watch. This isn't really something that we typically do on this podcast a lot. We watched, what's considered a bad but also a cult movie. And this is a really interesting niche movie, right? Like, it's a horror comedy. It's a parody of Jaws. It doesn't even break the top probably 10,000 movies on IMDb, right?
Probably not even the top 2,000, if we're being honest.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's a relatively fun movie, and it has some really interesting horror elements to it.
Yeah, I'm just going to spoil my opinion straight out of the gate. I actually liked this movie a lot more than I thought I would.
So did I.
Yeah.
So did I. Although this is kind of there's a niche of these kind of horror comedies that have some camp to them that really do actually appeal to me. And for example, I watched this movie called Killer Clowns from Outer Space a few weeks ago, and it was very much similar vibe to this.
Mm-hmm.
So, and these movies are tight too. These are hour and a half movies that, you can throw on pretty casually.
It certainly doesn't overstay its welcome, that's for sure.
Exactly. And so there's a lot of appeal to a film like this, a film that it knows that it's not trying to be the best movie ever, and it kind of just, it stays in its lane, and that's okay.
Yeah, but this movie does try, though, doesn't it? Watching this movie, I was kind of so what's funny is that you texted me. You were supposed to record with Jason, and then he had a other commitment, so you texted me. You said, "Can you do Piranha?" And I went, "Yeah, sure." And then you texted me almost like a disclaimer. This is a horror comedy, so I don't know if this is from Aguirre. You don't trust me anymore, but you were like, "This is a comedy, okay? Expect some bad dialogue." And I went, "Okay." And then I watched it, and I was like, the dialogue isn't actually that bad. It's kind of charming in parts.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. So that said, this is the primer episode. We're not going to talk too many spoilers during this episode. And I think where we'll start off with is probably the plot.
Okay. So the movie Piranha is, as you might have guessed, a sleepy little town is assailed by mutant piranhas that have escaped from a abandoned government research facility. So just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, it's not. And a plucky person finder and a drunk hick have to save the town from the evil piranhas.
Yeah.
And that's all the plot you need, baby.
What more could you possibly want for a premise?
Yeah, really. Yeah, Piranha. It's got piranhas in it.
What's really nice about this is, again, going back to the fact that it's a 90-minute film, it really just cuts to the chase, right? We don't need to get into the characters' backstories, although what's really cool about this is this film does exposition actually relatively well. We know who each of the characters are, and part of it is because each character is a caricature of certain type of, person kind of thing.
Sure.
We've got the grumpy drunk loner. We've got,
the kind of plucky, intrepid career woman.
Yeah, we've got crazy mad scientist guy.
We sure do. My favorite part is when he when you first meet him and he just bursts into the scene "What are you doing?" And then he attacks the main characters.
I just about said out loud, let's all use our words here.
Yeah.
And then continue to think that for the next 20 minutes where Mr. Mad Scientist is front and center of the screen.
Really.
But anyway, we should talk about some of the characters and people you may know here. And I think I want to start with the director, because he's honestly the most known person from this film.
Okay. I just want to say, before we go into this, I know nothing about any of these people. I did zero research. So I'm going to be reacting a lot.
You know what? There is a connection to a film that you picked earlier last year on this film. In this film.
Ooh, I'm intrigued.
So we do have a connection. So Joe Dante, the director of this film.
Okay, I've heard the name.
Yeah, he's kind of he's got a bit of a cult following, honestly. Like, he's kind of a relatively interesting director from the 70s, 80s, and mostly 90s was his prime period of film.
Mm-hmm.
He directed the movies Gremlins, both Gremlins 1 and Gremlins 2.
Okay.
Have you seen either of the Gremlins?
No, I haven't actually.
Oh, those movies would be really up your alley, I think.
I feel like some of our viewers at home have like a jar entitled movies Michael hasn't seen, and they've all just added a handful of change to it.
True.
Yeah.
And you know what? An even smaller jar that says movies that Michael hasn't seen that Michael would probably like as well.
Yeah, that's a small one.
This one's almost like a dry run of a movie like Gremlins, in the sense that Gremlins is a horror comedy, and it's just like perfected. Like,
Okay.
it's like comparison Michael Mann's Thief to Heat. Like,
Okay.
Thief is the dry run, Heat is the real deal. I would say Gremlins is obviously, in my opinion, the better of the two movies, and Gremlins is something that I have seen multiple times, and does have that large cult following with it. But he's also known for the films Inner Space, a movie that we've already talked about on this podcast, actually, Small Soldiers.
Oh, yeah.
So very recently, actually, too, when we did
okay.
The Dirty
I guess
Dozen.
we're on a Joe Dante kick.
Yeah, you know what? We might have to do Small Soldiers at some point because it's come up twice now this year.
Yeah. See, that's one of those movies I saw when I was a kid and I remember nothing about. So
That's funny because I do remember elements of that movie. I don't think it was a good movie, but I enjoyed it as a child.
this is becoming a podcast where we talk about interesting but mediocre movies.
Yeah, exactly. He also did the film Inner Space, which is an interesting sounding sci-fi comedy that I've never seen before,
Okay.
as well as The Burbs, which stars Tom Hanks.
Interesting.
Yeah. Oh, and the other thing I was going to mention too is he contributed to the Twilight Zone movie.
Oh.
And it was because of this film that he actually got to contribute to that, because Steven Spielberg liked this movie so much as a parody of Jaws that, he kind of got to be a part of the Steven Spielberg circle.
Yeah, and that is the one thing I learned about this movie after the fact, is that Steven Spielberg actually liked it. I guess Steven Spielberg's kind of a good sport about things, Yeah. Kind of a cool
exactly.
guy.
Well, without Steven Spielberg, we might not have had this film in a roundabout way, but that's a story for
Next
probably
week.
another time. Yeah.
And by another time, you mean the next episode.
Yeah, exactly. Talking about characters and people you may know, like I said, there's not necessarily a lot of modern day actors in this film. It's a low budget B horror comedy film.
I will say before we get into it, the actors are actually pretty good.
Yeah, they're not bad. I agree with you.
Even some of the hammier ones, I'm like, okay, I believe it.
Every actor went for it in this movie.
Yeah.
Like, nobody phoned it in.
No, definitely not.
And you could tell everybody was having a lot of fun on this one.
Especially
for sure.
the two leads, right? They actually had pretty decent chemistry.
I would agree with you, actually. I had a lot of fun with both of them.
Mm-hmm.
So there are two leads here. Is Paul Grogan, the stereotypical grumpy alcoholic loner, living way up in the mountains by himself without any sort of form of communication to the outside world. Like, the guy doesn't even own a car.
No. But he does own a raft.
A, Tom Sawyer kind of, down the river raft.
That is one of the moments in the movie where you're kind of just like, it's so contrived that you're almost just like, okay, whatever.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
That is it in a nutshell. I literally wrote that down. I was like, there it is. There's the most contrived part of this movie.
Yeah, really. It's also a sign of why this movie wouldn't work in 2023, because you could just FaceTime somebody. I guess 40 years ago, though, sometimes you just had to take a raft down the river.
Yeah, that's something that I'm really interested in talking about when we get to who this movie is for, because I have a lot of thoughts on that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that is played by Bradford Dillman. I don't really have a lot to talk about with his modern day films, because there isn't really a lot there from the modern day that you're gonna know.
Yeah.
The other main actor or main character is Maggie McGowan. She's kind of playing a private investigator looking for the teenagers who disappear in the opening scenes.
Yeah, what is her actual job? Like a searcher or something? I forget what she calls herself.
It's a skip tracer.
A skip tracer, yeah. In terms of character type, she almost kind of reminded me of like a Gal Friday kind of plucky, intrepid reporter.
Right.
From an old 40s comedy, but she's a person finder.
Yeah, and you know what? I actually liked her in that role as well, because it's not necessarily a role that you would expect a female to have in like a movies, right? As a private investigator.
No, so like we'll just for the viewers at home, basically like she's this very plucky, upbeat kind of career woman who is pretty in over her head, but she's just trying her best the whole movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much agreed.
I actually liked her a lot. She was a lot of fun.
Yeah, so did I. So did I. Played by Heather Menzies, who actually is a relatively famous actor. She played Louisa Von Trapp in The Sound of Music.
Oh shit.
Yeah, so I mean, more of a childhood actor, I guess, at that point, but still, like, that's a relatively large role, like a pretty iconic movie. I think everybody's seen it. I don't know if everybody likes it.
We've all seen it though.
Probably in that camp. We've all seen it. That's for sure.
So she went from The Sound of Music to this. I'm not sure if that's an upgrade or a downgrade, but
Well, you know, childhood acting, it's a little hit or miss, right?
sure.
But anyway, who else do we have? We have the mad scientist, Dr. Robert Hoke, who is deep involved in the Piranha conspiracy.
Wow.
They're turning the piranhas gay, Michael.
He was a good actor, but I think maybe he knew the movie he was in more than anyone else. Like he was just like yeah, like there's one scene in particular that we'll talk about in next week's episode where I was just like, okay, like I guess this is happening. But
yeah.
no, he was yeah, I feel like he was maybe more in on the joke than everyone else.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And so those are kind of our main setup of characters. There's a few other characters that I do want to mention, and also just because they're so like such character.
Yeah. I think I know who you're gonna bring up next.
I don't know if you do. Dr. Mengers, the other mad scientist, the connection to Dr. Hoke.
Okay, no, actually, that wasn't what I was gonna say.
She's involved a little bit, maybe halfway through the film when the military starts getting involved in everything, and she's kind of the liaison of the military and involved in some way with the science experiment. And she's played by Barbara Steele, who's actually considered one of the greatest scream queens of all time. We've actually talked about her because she had a role in the movie 8½.
Oh, really? Wait.
Yeah.
Was she the wife in 8½? Or no, was she the mistress in 8½?
No. She was married to one of the...
Oh, was she the sister-in-law? Oh, was she one of the side characters' young wife? I should really know people's names.
I love how you just guessed like a million different people.
Yeah, I basically just going through all the different women in the movie. Like, her?
She plays Gloria Morin, Meza Bada's new young girlfriend.
Yeah.
I think
that's
the
what I
older
said.
guy, right?
Yeah, no,
okay.
I remember.
You said like 8 people there. You can't claim like.
Wow, I got
the
it.
right
Come
person.
on. Give me that.
Okay. And so, you know, she's probably the most well-known actor in this film. Although there is one back in my pocket actor I'm going to to in a sec. Buck Gardner is another character. He's basically plays the pure capitalist, the guy who's running.
Guy.
Yeah, the guy who's running the resort, who knows that the piranhas exist because everybody tries to warn him, and he's like, "We're not going to shut down on my opening day no matter what happens."
So like the mayor from Jaws, but
exactly, but like
park.
turned up to 11.
Yeah, wow, that's hilarious.
And turned up to absolute 11.
You know who my favorite character was?
Who?
The guy in charge of the kids camp. That guy.
Yes.
He was
the camp counselor dude.
The camp counselor dude. He was hilarious. Every time he was on screen, I was laughing. Like, he's basically like, he's so pompous, but like so dead serious. It's perfect. Like, so the whole deal is Grogan has a daughter who's at this summer camp. Another contrivance. You know, you've got killer piranhas. You've got to put them at a summer camp on the lake, right?
His estranged daughter, like who's living with his ex, who he's put in summer camp, and he has absolutely zero way of contacting or getting to her at any point.
So the tension is she's scared of the water, but in order to get your water badge, you have to swim. So the first scene with this guy, he's like, intestinal fortitude, Grogan. Do you know what that means? And she's like, guts. And he's like, yes, guts. Like, or there's another scene where Grogan gets a hold of him, and it's the middle of the night, and he's woken up from a dead sleep. And he's like, oh, yes, Grogan, I remember you. You were drunk last time we talked. He's like, fly straight and narrow, Grogan. And then he just hangs up. Or, like, there's another scene where, like, he thinks he's searching for teenagers that might be swimming in the lake at night. He's like, if I catch those teenagers swimming, they're going to be in hot water. And I'm like, whoa, I love this guy so much. Everything about him is priceless.
Yeah. And we should talk about, like, you know, you mentioned that the contrivance of the fact that Paul Grogan's daughter is one of the kids at the summer camp kind of thing.
Yeah.
The summer camp plays a pretty large role because it's the main driving force of Paul. Like, it's downriver from where the
evil piranhas. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, he's trying his best to get there, but because of how, like, ridiculous this movie places its characters into, like, all of these different situations, like, it takes almost the entire movie for him to get there, even though, you know, they're realistically only, like, I don't know, 30 kilometers away, like, max kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess, like, if I was, like, a hack screenwriter in the 70s and I was assigned to write this script, I'd just be like, okay, killer piranhas, okay, so the main character has a daughter at summer camp downriver.
But it also plays into, like, the, you know, like, the campfire horror kind of stories. Like, it fits somewhere in that group
it's
of
effective,
films and
right? Like, how else are you supposed to make this premise terrifying, right?
Yeah, and, you know, like, being in this genre of movie in this period of time, there's also a lot of nudity in this film.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's, like, also pretty heavily sexualizes the, like, camp counselors at there. So it's also, like, playing into that trope pretty heavily as well.
Yeah. My favorite part is when there's two teenage girls, camp counselors, and it's late at night, and the one is like, come on, let's go for a swim, blah, 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 blah. And the one,
they're like, let's go skinny tipping.
But the other one's like, I don't know, I have a bad feeling. And I was sitting there, and I was like, oh, because she read the script. She read the script, so she knows not to go in the water.
Nice. There is actually, so this is where probably the most famous person, other than Barbara Steele, is Laura Dickinson, the blonde camp counselor. She's played by Melody Thomas Scott, who's a regular on the long-standing series, The Young and the Restless.
Oh.
So, yeah, she went on to have, like, quite the career in soap opera TV.
Good for her. You know what, though? I will say, everyone in this movie is pretty charming. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, even the bit players, you're just like, all right. Like, you know.
You're not wrong. You're really not. Like, this is a movie that it's pretty fun. Like, it's a pretty enjoyable film. Like, it's not a good movie, but it's a lot of fun.
I wouldn't say it's a bad movie either, you know? Like, it just kind of swings for the fences.
Yeah. I mean, what I'll say is that, like, you know, this plot has some pretty deep holes into it, like mile-wide holes in it. It's extraordinarily contrived, like,
yeah.
And it's so funny because this movie fits into this very niche spot of, like, you being you, and I know that you're a person who cares about plot and characters.
Yeah.
And yet this is a film that just so completely disregards, like, you know, well-built plot and characters.
You know what, though? I don't know that I fully agree on the character front, at least. Because, like, there is a scene early on where Grogan talks about how he's estranged from his wife and his daughter, and he's living on unemployment and stuff. And then, what's her name, Maggie, kind of comes on to him. And I was kind of like, oh, like, I almost feel like this movie does, in a weird way, respect some of its characters.
Yeah.
Like, maybe they're not super deep, but they're at least consistent. They're at least charming, right?
Yes.
Like, there's that exchange early in the movie when, like, she gets him to drive her up the mountain, and she's like, you think I'm wasting my time, don't you? He's like, no, I think you're wasting my time. And I was like, that's funny. Like, it's a little cheesy, but it's funny. Like, I'm on board.
Yeah, no, I very much agree. So who is this movie for? I think that if you like that perfect blend of horror and comedy, especially like camp comedy, literal like at parts camp
literally.
comedy. This is a movie that I think a lot of people are going to have fun with.
Yeah.
Here's the thing as well, like I said before, it's a relatively tight film. It's 90 minutes long. It's paced relatively well. Like you said, it doesn't overstay its welcome. And it's kind of an interesting contrast to Jaws in the sense that, like, Jaws is
Scary.
this movie. Well, Jaws has this good tension buildup, right? Like, it's build, release, build, release, build, release. Whereas this film, I think the biggest releases of tension, the biggest horror elements to me are in like the last kind of acts of the film.
Sure.
Where things like really explode everywhere.
Right. But even then, it's not exactly a scary movie, is it?
I thought the last couple of acts, like, it does it really well. And, you know, we don't get to see a lot of like daylight horror.
That's true.
Yeah. And so I can really appreciate when a film can kind of get out of the norm of, like, you know, the dark, like what's like on the other side of the room in the shadows kind of thing. Like this film is like, some of the best scenes of horror in this film are in broad daylight, middle of the day.
I guess most of this movie is in broad daylight, middle of the day, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Except for the opening, I guess, but
yeah.
but we don't need to talk about
I can't wait to talk about, I can't wait to dissect the opening of this film.
Okay.
In our spoiler-full discussion.
So next week, if you want to see me and Blake talk about a really bewildering horror movie, you know where to find us.
Yeah. Like, it's a cult classic, so, you know, if you like those small cult classic films, this is going to slot really easily into your watch list. Because it's like a man versus nature horror film, and like specifically like man versus beast kind of thing, you know, like if you're a fan of the modern day films, like Sharknado was one that immediately came to mind.
Yeah.
Cocaine Bear, like, is probably the most relevant film right now that it came.
I think in 40 years, some dudes are going to be doing a podcast talking about Cocaine Bear.
Yeah, I haven't watched it yet. I haven't heard great things about it. I don't know that the comedy is quite
on
up to
point.
par with, like,
no.
Yeah, with this film. The other one that came to mind was Crawl, which I think is just more pure horror. But I've heard good things about Crawl, and I haven't watched it yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think Quentin Tarantino really liked that one, so it's one that's on my list to check out at some point.
Okay, cool.
But what I'll say about this film is that you have to watch this film in the frame of mind of the period that it takes place in the 70s, because this film does not work in a modern day.
No, not even a little.
This movie would have been done about 10 minutes in after Paul Grogan whips out his cell phone and calls the police.
Or goes on Facebook and posts about it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this film just puts these characters in such remote settings and just keeps them, like, as far away from civilization as possible for as long as possible, basically, and lets the piranhas wreak havoc. And it just constantly is, like, slowing our main characters down, them to a crawl.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, the tension does almost kind of work when you just see everything trying to stop them, right? It does. You do kind of almost feel for these guys. You're like, fuck.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, a lot of that, you have to put yourself in that kind of frame of mind of this film takes place like 50 years ago. But in that setting, like, it does work relatively well.
That's fair. I agree with that. So anyways, yeah, I mean, I honestly think this movie is kind of worth your time if you're in the mood for a laugh.
Yeah, like, and if you're interested in, like, some good, well thought out horror elements, like, I thought some of the ideas and some of the settings, like, I'm a big Stephen King horror novel reader, and so, you know, I can always appreciate when creative geniuses can, like, really write characters into some really interesting, unique settings. And I thought this movie did that really well. You know, sometimes they were very contrived, but, you know, beyond that thought, I was having a lot of fun with what was going on screen.
And this movie is fun. Like, you know,
yeah,
it is a fun time. It might not be anything else, but it's fun.
I very much agree. And I think I'll come back to this one at some point in time as well, because I had so much fun with that.
We'll see. Maybe in 5 years, if we're still doing this podcast, we can come back to it.
Yeah, we'll do the re-piranhing.
Yeah, the re-piranhing. Okay. Well, on that weird, why don't we end it on that incredibly lame joke?
Well, we've got a couple other quick things to mention. So, like, when to watch. For me, this is a great night, Friday night, like late night horror film. You know, it's the stakes are both high and relatively contained at the same
Yeah,
time.
contained is a good word for it.
Like, the implications of the film are somewhat interesting, and I'm really actually interested in talking about the implications of the film in the spoiler full discussion. But
Okay.
for the bulk of the movie, you know, we're talking about the stakes of like a small camp and like, you know, individuals kind of thing rather than the state of the world or something like that, you know?
I would agree that it's a Friday night watch.
Yeah, I like this one a lot in that time period. Where to watch right now, streaming on Tubi with ads. That's where I watched it. You can also check it out if you have Shudder, the horror.
Oh,
Yeah, there's a horror streaming
never
platform.
heard of it.
I haven't subscribed to Shudder before, but I really really want to because I am a big horror buff. And honestly, if you have Shudder, you've probably already seen this movie because I gotta imagine it's one of the classics on there.
Mm-hmm.
You can also check it out on AMC Plus.
Cool.
So a lot of options to watch this one, and like you said, it honestly is worth your time. And honestly, it's 90 minutes. How much? You don't need much more time.
Come on.
Yeah. So yeah, I really hope that you check this one out. It's the cult classic from 1978, and I hope you enjoy it and have as much fun with it as it sounds like you and I both did.
I think after agree, it's good that we can kind of come back to each other and
Yeah.
finally agree on something again.
And who would have thought that it would have taken a bunch of mutant piranhas to do it?
Yeah. Who would have guessed it?
Yeah. All right, I think that is it then for this week. So we've got part 2, our spoiler full discussion next week, and then we're probably gonna have a week break, and then we'll be getting into the draft episode. And I'm really excited. I've just finished watching my films. I have a lot of thoughts on them, and I'm excited to see what you guys did.
I think you're going to like my pick.
You've said that, and I've kind of narrowed down what I think you've done to like 2 options.
Okay, well, let's see if you know me as well as you think you do.
Yeah, we'll see. Jason's got a lot wider of a scope to who he could pick than either you or I, so I think
That's true.
I think he's going to be the hardest one out of the 3 of us to guess what he's done. But I'm looking forward to
that guy. Who knows what that guy's up to?
Oh, fair enough. All right, see you next time.
Bye. Stay out of the water.